Hi everyone, my name is Martin Kruger. I'm a web development teacher as well as a front-end web developer, and I also help FEDSA with these web development mentoring sessions. They take place Mondays every single week between 5 and 6. If you'd like to join us, just go and find the ZA Tech Slack server and you'll find us there under the FEDSA mentoring channel. These sessions are sponsored by Code Capsules, which is a platform as a service. Highly recommend checking them out, especially if you're from South Africa. Your websites will be blitzfast. Right, and this session is going to be based on React, so let's jump into it. So to start, let's actually look at what React is. Right, so React is a front-end framework that was created by Facebook to suit their needs in 2011, and it was created by a developer that worked there called Jordan Walker. I'm not too sure how to pronounce that. And I believe this year he's actually left Facebook to start his own company, or their own company. Yeah, so let's look at why Facebook created React. Now, I can't say if this is 100% what was sort of the story that took place. It's just what was told to me on the grapevine. So basically, Facebook had, their site as you know it, and they had sort of all these sections that were basically reusable sections. So, for example, like the stories over here, or like a post, for example. Let's just actually have a look at a post here. So you can see here's a post, and then you'll see there's some common features with the post here. You've got this top part here with this image, and then a name, and then since when last it was actually posted, and then over here there's just sort of the more options, and then there's the post description here. So if you looked at it as sort of like a UI person from Facebook, you would have sort of seen that there is like a component here that could actually be created. Let me just bring that down. Okay, so hopefully that's coming through. But you can see that sort of this could actually be a reusable section within this post, where there is this image of this user, their name, and then, like we mentioned earlier, the time. Then each time you actually had a post, you could simply, if you turn this into like a component, you just simply would need to pass in this image, this name, and it will actually automatically do the date calculation for you. And then this more options, that could actually be its own component that gets handled elsewhere, so that you just go and create all of those options inside that more component, and it will reflect on all of your components wherever you're actually using it. So they needed a library that when they were actually boarding out Facebook, or not boarding it out, but when they were working with Facebook, they could easily just go and reuse these components. So for example, let's say there's this context section. You created that as a component, and if you wanted it to be over here, you would simply use the component on this side, and then all of these contexts and all of that would actually be inserted over here. So you end up with this UI framework where you can just reuse components all over the place and have a very modular website. So that's what I believe is where it did start, but I can't say 100% that is the full truth. Right, so we know that's sort of why they were trying to create React. So let's look at the differences between React and Vue and Angular. I'm not going to go through a really, really big comparison here. I'm just going to look at the difference between why React is actually a library and not a framework. So there's three frameworks, three really big frameworks that are quite popular and often discussed. Like I would say, like the big three. You've got Vue, which is got the quickest learning curve. It's very simple to use. And you've got React, steeper learning curve, and then finally you got Angular. So I'm just going to compare between Angular and React. So Angular is considered a full-on framework. When you actually install it, it's got routing already sorted out for you. It's already got like its state management choices. It's already made all of these decisions for you. And it comes as this full-on framework that you install, and then you start coding within this framework. And you need to do things a certain way in Angular. Your files need to be laid out in a certain way, and things need to be arranged in a certain way. React, on the other hand, is actually not a framework. It's actually a library, specifically a UI library. It's not concerned about what type of routing you've got and used, or what type of state management you've got and use. It really just cares about rendering things to the DOM, or sorry, rendering UI elements. So in that way, React is not a framework; it's a library. And I'm just mentioning this just so that if you ever asked an interview question, like I know that some interviews do like to ask about this. So React is not a framework. Angular is a framework, where React is just a library or UI library. Right. So before we start diving into all the cool things that React does and all the features and all of that, let's first focus on installing React. And it's dead simple. React, as I mentioned, is a library, and you could simply just go and import that library through npm or yarn, but there's a lot of tooling in that it doesn't come with, and that can be a real pain to go and set up, like setting up Webpack and all of that. So what people typically use is create React app, and it's, what is the right term here? It's basically like a boilerplate setup that React offers you. And the syntax to create a React app is really, really simple. So 99.9% of the time, whenever you're going to be building a React app, you aren't going to just be importing React into your project. You would typically start with this create React app, and then you would go from there. So to do that, very, very simple. You just go npx, let me zoom in a bit more, npx create React app, and then the name of your app. So in this case, let's just call it FEDSA mentoring app. Okay. So now when I push enter, it's going to start going and basically building out this app. You can add extra flags onto here to customize the template that you're getting. Like, it's just getting the, I don't know what you call it, the most baseline installation that Create React app has got. But for example, there's also a TypeScript Create React app. There's even like state management Create React app, so that when you're actually installing Create React app, it's coming with a whole bunch of stuff already added to your installation, so you don't have to worry about it. But so we're just going to run the baseline one here. So npx Create React app, and then the name of your app. And then it's going to use this name as the name in your package.json, and then the name as your folder. Right, so I'm going to push enter, and we're going to let that run. So it usually only takes about 30 seconds to a minute. It depends on how slow your internet is, or how fast your internet is, and whether these repositories where you get the data networks where you're getting all of these packages from, is whether they are running fast or not. So let's just let that build out. Okay, so that's finished. So now I'm going to go and navigate to the folder that I'm in here. You can use the terminal, but I'm just using like a file browser, so that it's a bit of a better visual experience. So you can see here is where the app downloaded to, and I'll go inside it, and here is your Create React app. That's what you should be seeing. In the source is where all your files are, and then your package.json, which has got all the dependencies, and you should be seeing a node modules, which is it's gonna be huge, probably about 200 megabytes. Yeah, 138 megabytes. Okay, so I'm gonna go and open this in VS Code. And then we're going to get started with our first Create React app. Okay, so it's opened up. So I want to just drag up the terminal, and we can go look at package.json at the different commands we can run. So we're looking at the scripts here, and we can see that we've got a start, a build, and a test, and an eject. We're just going to be basically looking at start and build. So when you are developing, you're going to be running the start command, and that starts your dev server. Then when you're going to be deploying your app on Netlify or whatever service you're going to be building it on, you would go and get it to run the build command. So when it's running the dev server, it's more optimized for development, so things load quicker and all of that, but it's not optimized at the end of the day, whereas the build will optimize it for the best experience in a production setting. Okay, so to get our app running, very, very simple. We just go yarn run start. Okay, I'm using yarn here because we've got a yarn.lock. If there was package-lock.json, then we'd know it's npm. We'd run npm instead. And there we go. This is now our Create React app, 100%. You can see that it's actually very, very quick to get started with React. So we basically just had that Create React app and had to wait for that to finish. and then yarn run start or npm run start, and there you go. You've actually got your create React app already running. Okay, so now let's start looking at the features that React's got to offer us. So there's quite a few features when it comes to React, but there's only three that we're going to be looking at in this session, which is components, JSX, which is JavaScript XML, and the virtual DOM. There are other features, like I mentioned. There's like server-side rendering. There is, let me have a look at my notes here. And unidirectional data flow. So there are some other features that we aren't going to be discussing here. We're going to be looking at just the three big ones, which is the components, JSX, and the virtual DOM. Okay, so first things first, let's explore our way around the actual app itself so that we can become familiar with what is part of a React app. I know we haven't looked at how sort of the files are structured and all of that yet. We're going to come back to that in a moment. I first want to just look at just a couple of the key features that I mentioned. And then once we sort of have an understanding of that, then we can come back and look at how the files are arranged and sort of the main entry point. So the first one we're going to look at is JSX. So as I think I mentioned, JSX stands for JavaScript XML. And you're actually having a look at it, you're actually seeing it right here. It's actually very simple. It's basically HTML tags that get converted into JavaScript. So as I believe I mentioned, JSX stands for JavaScript XML. And so let's have a look at what it's all about. So you can see that there's all this content here. There's a div, and there's a header, and then there's an image. And then edit source app.js. That's all of this content that's on the page here. So I'm actually going to get rid of all of this, and I'm just going to go and put our own div, and I'm going to say hello world. Save it. Okay. So now you can see there is hello world up there. I'm going to change it from a div actually to an h1 and save it. Okay. So what you're looking at over here actually is JSX. Basically, JSX is HTML syntax that gets converted into a function that React uses to create an element. So as an example here, you can see that we're returning h1, hello world, and that reduces this over here. What's actually happening is React is actually doing this. It's actually going React create element, then the element that we want, so h1, then don't want to worry about that, just props and things, and then the content that's going into that element. Okay, so let me just take that out. Sorry, I don't have React imported. Okay, so what's actually happening here when we actually are using this h1, the syntax like this, React is turning it into this react.create element. And then it goes and uses that tag over here. And then don't worry about this for now. And then it goes and puts this inside of those tags. Okay. So JSX is when we go and basically use HTML looking syntax like this. And that gets turned into this code automatically for us. So you could actually go and write out your entire app using this syntax like this with this create element. But it just doesn't look good. You know, we're not taught that way. We're taught to write HTML like this. You know, this is the way that we're taught to write HTML. So it only makes sense that we're going to follow this same kind of syntax. You know, so a person jumping into React, they see this from just the basic HTML background. I can bet you that if I gave this one line to a person starting out in HTML, they would probably know that they could actually go in here and probably put like a h1 if they'd like to. You know, because they can see that this is the div and there's P's and that. So they could probably, it's intuitive. They will know that they could go and insert the syntax here. Okay, so that's JSX. It's just basically stuff that looks like HTML, if I could put it in a blunt way. So I'm just going to go and clean this up, get rid of that. And I'm just going to make h1 that just says hello world, exclamation mark, and we save it. Okay, so that is now an app component that just goes and shows an h1 that says hello world. But it's not really useful that our app just does this. So The next thing we're going to look at is components. And that's, I would argue, is probably the most important part of React. It's all based around these components. So let's look at how we create a component. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do in a project that's brand new like this, we're going to go to the source folder and we're going to create a folder called components. Now, remember, like we mentioned earlier, that React doesn't really care about how you do things. So it doesn't care if you make a components directory or not. But this is probably the most common pattern in React, is that we put our components in a component directory. I don't think I've ever seen a project where we aren't using a component directory. So I do suggest that you do follow it the way that I'm doing it like this. So we've got a components folder here. And now let's create a greeting component. Okay, so it's when we load it, it's going to just say hello to you or something of the sort. Okay, so let's go and create that component. So we're going to call it greeting. And then for the extension, we're going to use not JS, but JSX. So you can see my Material icon theme has actually changed it to a React icon, whereas there it's the normal JavaScript icon. There is no difference between whether your file is called JS or JSX, but it lets a person know that this is going to contain React code inside of it. So you don't have to do this. You can see that React's own app.js in create React app isn't using .jsx. So there's no difference other than knowing that this is now a React component. Like, I'll give you an example here. Is that, say we had a utilities file that had some functions that did some basic math calculations. So let me just call it utils.js. It shouldn't actually be there in components. So this will get dragged into source. And it's just got some basic functions like add numbers. And returned a plus b, and then we just need a and b here. So we'd have this function here. And it's just a normal JavaScript function we could use throughout our app. By looking at this file, I know immediately now there is no React components in here. There aren't any React components. It is only going to be JavaScript that's written in here, like JavaScript functions or whatever JavaScript. Whereas if I look at greeting.jsx, I know immediately this is going to be a React component. So you don't have to follow this. This is, I guess, an opinionated way of doing it. But if you do follow along with our short courses that are going to be released in the near future, free short courses, I do suggest that you do it this way, just to get into a good habit. Okay, so we've created our greeting file here, and we're going to turn this into a component. So let me just split down app.js. So it's down there. I actually want this to be .jsx. It might break the app because I renamed it. Okay, so this sometimes happens when you're renaming stuff to .jsx. So we just got to kill the server and restart it. It's very quick to start. There you go, it's back to normal. That does sometimes happen when you rename a file. That's very important, but you shouldn't often come across an error like that. Okay, so let's just get back to debug mode and everything. All right. Okay, so we've got our app.jsx here, and now we've got this greeting.jsx file that we're going to create as a new component. So simple. You just go import React from React, and then you create a function here. And now this is going to be the name of your component. So I'm going to call it greeting. And inside it, we're going to return, let's make it an h2 and say, hello, Michael. And then we just need to export default greeting. Okay, so that's our component. Let me just get rid of this over here. Okay, so that's our component, and it's ready to get used. So to use our component, we first have to import it. So I'm going to go import greeting from, and then we go and we find it in components / greeting. You don't have to go and put the extension, not in React. In normal vanilla JavaScript with module files in, you might have to go and put .js or whatever, but we don't have to do that in React. Okay, so we've imported our greeting. Now we have to use it. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to add a div. Okay, so we've got our div with our h1 hello world, and then over here, I'm now going to go and use our greeting. So to use our greeting, we basically just go and open our tags like HTML, and we type in the name of our component, and then we just close. We just use the ending tag. Oh, sorry, what is that called again? I think it was self-closing tag. So we've got our greeting component that's got loaded here. And so then what I'm going to do is I'm going to save the file. You know it's not saved if it's got the little white circle there. So I'm going to save it now. I guess I had saved it. And so now you can see, hello, Michael. I'm actually going to change this to say heading. And then hello, Michael. Okay, so you can see we've actually got this greeting component now that's loaded into our app component, our main sort of entry point. And it's working great. What I could do now is I can actually just duplicate this as many times as I want and save it. And then you can see, hello, Michael, hello, Michael. It's now duplicated as many times as I've actually got this component being used here. So that's amazing. Like if we now had another page somewhere else in our app and we wanted to use this greeting, we just have to go and import the greeting like this. We just have to import it, and then we just have to go and use the component. And we can use this throughout our app now. So just back to that Facebook design, if we had, for example, created this contact section, we could just go and put, imagine this was contacts. We could just go and put this wherever we want in our app, and it's going to display all of those contacts. Okay. So we've created this greeting, and that's it. That's your component working. It works great, but it's super limited because it only says hello, Michael. What if the user's a different user? You know, like John, or Jim, or Dwight. So this is now the next thing we're going to be looking at, or not the next thing, but part of components, which is called props, and that is short for properties. So what it means is we can pass values into this component, and then those values will be available inside of the component. Okay, so I'll show you what I'm talking about. I'm going to go and say first name is equal to, and then what did we want here? Let's say Michael. Okay, so first name is equal to Michael. Now you can see I've added this in and I've saved. No code, nothing's broken, nothing of the sort. But it's definitely doing something. So in the component, there is a hidden property or hidden variable called props that I guess is only going to be there if you actually include it. That's why I'm sort of calling it like hidden or secret. It's not really secret, but you don't have to include it. But if you do include props, right, and then you console log it, you will see that it's now got first name Michael. So any of these variables or values that we pass through here, it's going to be accessible via this props parameter that's in our component. So if I wanted to go and maybe also pass a last name, now when I save it, this is now going to have first name and it's going to have last name in this props variable. So I'm going to save it. Okay, so there you can see we've now got a first name Michael and a last name Scott. Okay, so these values that we're passing here, these props, these variables are then accessible via this props variable in our component. Okay, so the reason why that's important is that we can now basically make our component completely reusable by passing in the data that goes into it and then displaying just that data. So I'll show you what I mean here. Okay, so before we actually use the props here, I'm actually going to comment that out. And I'm going to create a variable and I'm going to call it test name. Okay. And I'm going to make that Jim. Now, if I want to use this variable in this H2, can I just write test name like this? You see, it doesn't look like that's just going to be a string. So I'm going to save it. And then you can see it's test name. Can you see how the text is white? And if I take it back to what it was earlier, it's also it's white like this. That usually means that it's just going to be a string when it's white like that. So for React to recognize that there's a variable, we have to put curly braces around it. And then we save it. So you can see now this variable test name, Jim, by putting curly braces around it, it's telling React, hey, wait a minute, this isn't going to be a string. This is actually going to be a variable. So you can see here's Jim. And you can actually do basic expressions in here. You can actually, let's just say 10 plus 10. And you'll see that it's going to be 20. So you can have very basic expressions in here, even ternary operators. And just before we move on, just to try and make it easier to remember this. It's no different than when you've got a template string. So let's just say template string, const template string example is equal to, also string literal. You can usually do something like this, hello test name. I'm sure you've come across something like this before. It's sort of no different. Yeah, you're just omitting, or you're not going and using the $sign like that. Okay, so that's working great. So now we know how to use a variable. We use these curly braces, and then we can actually use a variable inside here. So let's go back to our props here. So I'm uncommenting that, re-enabling this line of code. Let's save it. Okay, so we can see that we've got a first name property and we've got a last name property because we're passing them in here, first name and last name. And any variable that we any prop that we create here, they're all going to be accessed under this one props variable. So I mean, I can add anything. I could add something stupid, like something stupid is equal to test, and then save it. And then if you have a look here, we can see first name, last name, and then something stupid. So this over here, this first part, let's just call it the key, I guess. This is going to be the name of the variable that's accessible via props, or the key that's in props. Okay, so let's just take out this part. We don't need that. Okay, and save it. Right, so what we're going to do now is we're going to go and get that first name and that last name. So I'm going to say const first name is equal to props dot first name, because remember we've got this props object here with first name in it. Okay, so props dot first name, and then we're also going to get that second name or last name is equal to props dot last name. Okay, now we're going to combine it. We're going to go and say hello first name space last name. Let's save it. There we go. So now our component is saying hello variable first name space variable last name. Okay. And what that ends up being is hello first name, which is Michael. So hello Michael, and then last name, which is Scott. So it ends up being hello Michael Scott. I'm going to zoom out a tiny bit so that the text is all in one line. Okay, great. So there we go. So now we've actually created a component that can be reused throughout our app, and we can actually pass values to it so that it gets used differently. So I'm going to show you an example here where we've got this. Let me just move this over. We've got this greeting for this user Michael Scott. I'm going to duplicate that exact component. I'm going to save it. So you can see that it's the exact same component below. But now this time, I'm going to change this to what should, and save it. There you go. So now you can see that when we're using this component, we can pass these values to it, and it's a completely reusable component. So let's have a look at this now, this component here. We could call this component, and then, for example, say image, we would pass a particular image file to it, and it's going to display this exact user's image, and then we'd pass Tom Russo as full name, for example. So let's just say over here, let's just change it to full name. Sorry, I'm going to have to mess with it here. Tom Russo. So we pass that full name into it, and then in our component, we could display this full name, and we could display his picture. So ultimately, we end up coding this thing just once. Then when we loop through our users or our posts or whatever, we just got to go and insert the data to display it like this. Okay, so I hope that's sort of making sense. So let's now start looking at some other things we can do here. So I'm just going to get rid of this full name Tom Russo. Okay, so we've got this greeting. And that works great. Now, let's look at actually creating a heading. Like imagine we've got a page, website, and there's 5 different pages like home, about, contact, blog, and let's just say shop or products. Each of those pages is going to have a heading, like home, it's going to have the home heading, then products is going to have a products heading, contact will have a contact heading. But now what if we actually made a single component that was like a heading component? We could use that heading component throughout our entire page, and then we only need to start it in one place. Okay, so let's actually go and create another heading, create a component here called heading, and then basically build it out. Okay, so in my components directory, I'm going to go and create a new file. I'm going to call it heading.jsx. And then I'm going to go and import React from React. You won't have to do this in newer versions, but I'm including for the sake of just completion. Okay, so we import React from React, and then we create our component name. Now, your component name must be in capital letters, otherwise it won't get recognized. And then you should have the same file name as your component name. Don't call your component name heading and then over here heading item or something. They must be the exact same name. So function heading. Okay, and then I'm actually going to put props here because probably want the props. And then we're going to return. Let's make it an H1 and just do like test. And then at the bottom, export default heading. Okay, so we've got our heading component working. I'm actually going to put it up here. So we've got that same sort of functionality we had earlier where we were changing up here and then apps at the bottom. Okay, so we've got our heading. Now let's go and use it. So now I'm going to show you a cool little trick. It's not always going to work if your project's really big and it takes a long time for VS Code to recognize all of this. But if you start typing out your component, you can see it here, it's this next one. Sorry, that's in the way. You can see it here, it's this next one. And it's got ./component/heading. We know we created that one. If I push down to select it and I push tab, it's automatically going to do that import for me. So I didn't have to go and write this import in here. It's automatically gone and done that for me. Okay. So I'm going to go and close that tag, and I'm going to delete this one, and I'm going to save. Okay. So now you've actually got this test. This is our heading component. You can see it over here, this test. If I go and I write 1, 2, 3 and I save, then you can see 1, 2, 3 automatically goes and updates it. Okay, so we've got this heading component. So now let's say we wanted to make it so that the text was dynamic. So we'd be like something like heading text is equal to this, or let's just call it heading 1. Then inside here, we would have to go const heading text is equal to props.heading text. We know that this heading text exists as a prop here because we're passing this here. This is automatically, by adding it here, it's automatically available by the props. We don't have to do anything else. In Angular, you're going to have to like do a whole bunch of code before this. Where in React, you don't. You just got to write it here. That's it. That's why React is incredibly fast for prototyping stuff. You'll even see people doing basic hello world apps that are complete overkill. But it's just because it's so easy to just actually get something going in React. Okay, so we've got this heading text, and it's got heading 1. And then we're selecting it here. Now we actually just want to go and use it in our app or use it in our component, heading text, and save. Okay, so we've got heading 1. So if I change this over here to 2, save it, you can see it's updating there. Let's make it just a bunch of numbers, save it, it's updating there. So what I'm writing here is what's getting used in this component. And I can have more than one. I can have a second one and make its content different. So now you've got heading 5, 4, 3, 5, and then 2, 3, 4, 2, 3. Okay, so yeah, you got your heading, but personally, this is not intuitive to me. If there's a heading component, for example, how am I supposed to know that we need to use heading text inside that component? I might choose heading text. You might decide to call your text just text. You might just say text. You might just say heading as well. This is difficult to work with. You're going to have to go into the component, see what props are getting used. If you're using TypeScript, it actually will handle all of this for you. But so you're not going to know which props to be using for your component. So a better way to typically handle this type of way is to use another sort of hidden property, which is props.children. And basically what that does is it takes all of the content that's between a beginning and closing tag. So to show you what I mean here, I'm going to duplicate this and I'm going to take that heading text out of this. And it's not going to be a self-enclosing tag anymore. We are going to add the tag. We're going to close it like this. And then in the middle, I'm going to write, this is props children. Okay, so now it's not actually going to access this yet. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and console log props here, console log props, and save it. And what you're going to see now when I refresh the page is for this heading over here, we're passing in heading text, right? So it's available as heading text in the prop. In the second one, we aren't passing anything to it, but we've got content between the beginning and closing tags, or the begin and end tags. Now, that content is going to be available as props.children. This is like the only other hidden thing you sort of need to know about. So in this component, we can actually get children by saying const children is equal to props.children. Then we can use that children in our code. So I'm actually going to just delete this one here. Okay, now I'm going to save it. And there you go. Okay, so now instead of actually... so let me actually undo that so we can look at the two together. Okay, so now instead of going and having to pass a prop like this and sort of guess what that prop is, we now instead pass this content between the beginning and closing tag. This is more intuitive now, just at least in my opinion, because, you know, when we're writing HTML, how do we write it when we've got a heading? We write it like this. This is my heading. So doesn't it make sense that when we've got a heading in React, we'd want to utilize it in the same way? I'm not saying that you shouldn't be using props like this. A lot of the times you are going to be passing props like this. But certain things like headings, basic components, rather be making use of props.children, because then it functions more like an HTML tag, like you know it. Like when a person thinks of a heading, they're going to expect the content to go in the middle. Then you're not going to have to guess what your text prop is going to be. It just knows that you just know that you've got to pass the text in the middle. You could still go and actually pass additional information, like maybe we could say like heading type, and then we actually choose the heading type. Maybe we want it to be H2. Then in our props, we're going to have the children, which is this content here, and we're going to have this prop that we've created here, this heading type. So you can see heading type here and heading type. Okay, so that's sort of the basics of a component. Just thinking, is there anything that I sort of haven't looked at in regards to components? Yeah, so just before I move on, so now imagine we had all those pages. For one page, you just had to go and basically have this component, and you can just write your home, for example, home. Then on your other page, you could then write blog. You know, and then your styling can just get done in this page over here. So let's just actually look at very quickly putting some styling in here. So I'm going to just create a basic CSS file. I'm just going to call it heading.css. And then in here, I guess I'm just going to do an H1 and just do color is red. And then in our component, we're going to import heading.css and save. There you go. Okay, so now we've actually got this styled for this component. Styling is a little bit more, there's a bit more to styling than this, where we're just including a CSS file like this. This isn't the way we'd exactly work with overwriting the H1 like this. But just to show you the example, that we've now got this heading component where we've got our own styling for this component. And if we wanted to go and change this throughout our entire site, we would just go and, let's just say we changed it over here to like some kind of blue and save it. I guess that's not the best example. Let's go with like a green so that it's more visible. So it's green now, and anywhere we went and used this heading component, it's going to reflect these CSS changes. So now you got this highly modular component that you can just use throughout your app, and you only have to go and work with it, like change the styling in one place, or if there's some code you want to change, you only need to change it in one place. And that's really important for, you know, these really big sites. Okay, so let's start looking at some other content. So the next thing we're going to be looking at is the virtual DOM. And that's what makes React so incredibly fast. So let me just go and clean up all this code. Okay, so let's get started on that. Okay, so I've cleaned up app, and there is just now one heading that is sitting here. Now, you might have noticed that when I'm changing things on the site and I push save, it automatically goes and updates the content here, but it doesn't actually reload the page. That is because React is a single page application, or you'd often see the abbreviation, an SPA. And what that means is that whenever there's an update happening in our app, it never goes and reloads the page. Like most of the time, you don't want your React app to actually reload the page. You end up losing your state and all of that. Usually with React and other frameworks, everything's actually happening in this one instance of your browser, and then it's updating the DOM within this browser page. It's not, for example, when I'm saving it, reloading the page with all this new content. That's not what's happening. It's actually going and adjusting the DOM elements that you actually see in our dev tools. So when I go and, for example, I go and I'm duplicating 2 more, I'm going to save them. Now watch how there's going to be a color here, probably purple or orange, that goes and sort of highlights where there were changes that took place. So I'm going to save it, and there you see. So did you see there was something that happened in the head, and then there was something that happened over here? So I'm going to just delete one, I'm going to save it, and then you can see that something has happened there. Okay, so these changes are taking place. It's altering the actual DOM here. It's not reloading the page with a whole bunch of new content. Now, let's go and take a look at how React is actually doing this. Right, so what happens with React is that I've saved the file, right, and we've got these 3 headings. Now, the last time we updated the UI state of the app is when I saved it now. And React has gone and taken this DOM and all these changes and basically created a virtual DOM. So what that is it's like a JavaScript object of our DOM. Then if we were to go and add, for example, 2 more elements like this and save it, but let's say our app was actually doing this. We pushed a button and it was generating 2 more elements. And then we were to save our file. What React is going to do is it's going to compare, as soon as we save our file, React is going to go and create a new UI state or virtual DOM, like a snapshot, and then it's going to compare our previous snapshot with this newest snapshot. Okay, and so it will then find, remember we first had these 3 here, and then we added these 2. What it's going to find is that in its virtual DOM, the differences between the 2 files, and we call it the diff, is that these two elements were added, right? And then what it's going to do after that is that it's just going to add just these 2 H2 elements at the end here, right? So let me save it, and then those 2 get added at the end here. Now, that might seem simple, like, you would expect it to actually behave that way. But let's look at why it actually makes React so fast. Right, everyone, so that's where we're going to be leaving it off today. This has just sort of been an intro for React. Due to load shedding, there haven't been many people able to attend. So I've decided just to hard code. Okay, thank you very much for watching. As mentioned in the start of the video, this is part of our FEDSA mentoring sessions. They take place on Mondays between 5 and 6 every Monday. Be sure to check them out. You can get more details on the ZA Tech Slack server, and then just join us in the FEDSA mentoring channel. This has just been a brief intro to React so that students will be able to complete our short courses. I'm busy building out some free short courses that are React-based, project-based learning that we use Trello and everything. We're trying to get students to experience what it's like working for a company, so that when they've actually bought out these projects, they are ready to jump into a job. That's what we want people to be able to do, is not just learn about web development, but also become job ready in the process. Okay, if these sessions have been helpful to you, if you've got any feedback, please feel free to just leave a message or anything. I'd love to know how we can improve it. I'd really try and make these as valuable as we can for you. Okay, great. Have a good week. Cheers.